Somebody saw the title of this evening's sermon, and they said, "You already preached that one." And I said, yeah, I did. And they said, "Well, why are you preaching it again?" And I said, "It's a test. I wonder how many people will notice." And then they said, "No, really, seriously." And I said, "That's because I'm lazy." And they said, "Seriously?" And then they came back and they said, "Oh, it's a sequel. That's what it is." And then somebody else says, it's been a while since you've done these. And I was thinking it hadn't been that long, but either way, we're making a kind of a return this evening to our list of reasons why, you got to love it, right? People don't like you, or reasons why people may not like me, to make it more personal. And I did have somebody come up to me tonight and ask if they needed extra paper tonight, if they needed an extra blank sheet or two to make out their list of reasons for themselves. And we've made other jokes already. We had a couple of these a couple months ago about how the love-hate relationship we have. We've also made it clear that the original list of 40 came from a chapter in a book and then a sermon, and has been preached a few different times by a few different people in a few different ways. I guess I don't know if it's that I am lazy or I'm too challenged by the 40 that I haven't even attempted to try to do even 20. I know one guy that did 20 of the 40 in a Bible class. Of course, he didn't get to actually spend any time on all of them. So you got to kind of figure out how you want to do it. This is how we're going to keep doing it this evening. 7 more. We've looked at 7 each of our times. 7 more reasons why people may not like us. It's been said that we cannot control whether somebody likes us. I mean, that's kind of on them. But that we do have at least a certain amount of control as to whether we are likable as people in general. And you can think about that when it comes to certain people in your life. There may be somebody or some bodies, there may be more than one person, that for whatever reason, they just aren't going to really like you that much. Maybe it's things that have happened in the past that were on you that they can't seem to get over. Maybe it is something just on them. And as we often say, there's 2 sides to every story. Somebody said there's 3 sides. That there's this each side story, and then there's what really happened is the third side or third part of the story. But we realize that we can't control other people. We can't change other people. But we can do what we can to change ourselves, to improve our behavior, to be more godly, to be more Christ-like. And when you think about this one, the idea of this series this consideration is working on eliminating unhealthy barriers in our relationships. It's not about shallow reasons that somebody might have. They might have a list they've made of, here's why I don't like this person. It's more about legitimate reasons that we can work on, that can sometimes be like barriers between us and our spouse, our friends, our fellow church member, and so on. You can look at this evening's list of 7 under these 3 categories. That the first 3 or 4 are more careless things we do, and then there's a couple toward the middle, or toward the end, middle, that are more about being controlling. There's one that a synonym would be being controlling. And then the last couple are ones that are more outright corrosive to our relationships. They're just outright damaging and harmful to our interactions with other people. As we think about these, then our prayer is that God will work in our lives. We will help Him help us to not have legitimate reasons why somebody could point and say, well, this is why I don't like them. So without further ado, here is number 1 of the 7 more reasons why people may not like me. And as we've done, we can put these into a question. Are you questions? And so the first one tonight, are you unthoughtful? Unthoughtful. You might think of other words like inconsiderate, inappropriate, insensitive, unsympathetic, or unthoughtful. Let's open up. Big surprise to Proverbs 25, There's a couple this evening from Proverbs 25, and so if you want to mark, you might just put a marker or your ribbon if you've got one in Proverbs 25, and you can use that to hold your place. Especially if you want to flip over later, we've got some New Testament references that will be mostly on the handout, and those are also more for you to take home and look at. We're not going to have the occasion to dig into them, but you might, I know sometimes people like to just flip over. So just a suggestion, Proverbs 25 is where we begin at least. Proverbs 25, notice with me verse 20. It says this, "Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, and like vinegar on soda." Or you might even have one that has like vinegar on a wound or a scab. Now, this is one of those proverbs that over the years, some have taken this in a very positive light, in that you're cheering them up and you're helping them, but we're leaning more this evening for sure that it is not such a positive thing, and that it's about the appropriateness of the situation. It's about thinking through what I'm saying and also when I'm saying it and to whom I'm saying it. What mood is this person in? And you don't always know, especially when you're dealing, say, with a stranger on the street, although you can often pick up on some social cues and expression of face and posture. But it's when somebody's having a bad day, they're going through it, and we're just a bit too cheerful. It's almost like when a night owl and a morning person get together at the wrong time of the day or the right time of the day, right? It's kind of like that. You might keep that in mind for the next proverb. Some overlap here. Or it reminds me of times when we're insensitive about someone's situation. Maybe they've just been diagnosed with an illness and they're sharing that with us and wanting us to bear their burden and pray with them. And our first response is to go, yeah, I had a cousin that had that, and they didn't last very long. They died 2 weeks later or something, right? I mean, sometimes we get our feet in our mouth and our foot in our mouth, maybe our feet, both feet, and we just don't think. And then we wonder why people may not like us very much. So look at the next reference here, Proverbs 27, verse 14. A few years ago, we were at the Polishing the Pulpit seminar in Tennessee, and my mother was still living in Tennessee at the time, but if you're familiar with Tennessee at all and the time zones, if you get far enough east in Tennessee, you get into a time change. And I wasn't thinking about that. I also wasn't thinking about the fact that this is a Saturday morning. I was attending a conference, and so I was going to an 8 o'clock lecture that Saturday morning. And I decided to text her because they were leaving that day to come as well, coming in a couple of days later. And I decided to text her and wish her a good morning and ask about what time they thought they were going to get on the road. And all she sent back was Proverbs 27, verse 14, just the reference, and let me look it up. Here's what it says, Proverbs 27, verse 14. "Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, will be counted as cursing." That goes back to that night owl morning person, or when you text somebody, when you think, it's a little early, and then you even forget that there's an hour difference, it's an hour earlier where they are, and you wake them up with your text that morning. Proverbs 27:14. And we make jokes about this. Spouses talk about the other spouse. There's probably hundreds of videos on social media of somebody making fun of their spouse, that one of them is quiet and careful if they're up first in the morning. Maybe they're making breakfast for themselves or for the whole family, or they're getting ready to go to work. They're letting their spouse sleep in, and they're as quiet as a mouse. The other spouse, it's like they slam every cabinet door, and it's just as loud as they can be. They're going to wake everybody else up. And of course, some people even say that, right? Well, if I'm up, everybody else is going to be awake. And again, we make jokes about it, we play around with it, but is it possible that some of those things aren't as innocent fun as we might sometimes make them or try to make them? These proverbs are warning us about the timing and the way that we approach people. Now, one other slight consideration here is that, especially this one, Proverbs 27:14, it's possible that there's a layer here of empty flattery as well. That it's not just about the loud voice and the early morning, that part of why it is counted as cursing is because The whole situation is messed up because it's not sincere. You might think about that too. There's an old Italian proverb that says, the person who praises you too much, they either have deceived you or they're planning to. Something to think about. But here's another proverb that's been around for a long time in just kind of in human culture, that people don't always remember a lot of other things about you or that you did, even what you said. But what is it? They always remember how you made them feel. And that's positive and negative, isn't it? So if I'm unthoughtful, we can be a bit pithy here and say, I might need to rethink how I say and do things in life. Here's the second one, and this one goes right with that. Are you rude? Are you rude? This is another one I think sometimes we dismiss, that being polite, having courtesy, those are good things, but I wonder if sometimes as Christians we miss the fact that really common courtesy is humility that comes from Christ, kindness that comes from Him, that we are expressing in common ways. Whether it is someone that's taking our order at the fast food restaurant, or the person that when we're checking out at Walmart, or whatever it is, or it's the church member, or it's the spouse that is doing something that we don't like, and we start the conversation on a sour or rough note. Look at a couple of these proverbs here. Proverbs 18, verse 23. The comparison here is between the poor and the rich, but there might be a principle here about the difference in how we approach things. Proverbs 18:23 says, the poor use entreaties, but the rich answer roughly. And so take the principle there for a moment, ignore the poor versus rich comparison, and just ask, which one am I more likely to do? If you make it a question even, when someone asks me a question or they need my help, am I more the kind that responds with, what? All right? What do you need now? Or am I more the type that says, what do you need? How can I help you? Which one of those? And then put the rich versus poor back in there, and then you can inquire and wonder, are there ever times that some of this comes from somewhere? And it's not about rich people being bad and poor people being good, but that sometimes it's about how we see ourselves, isn't it? If we have this air of superiority about us, well, we may not say it, we may not even consciously think it, but we operate on the basis of being better, sometimes than everybody else in our lives, but at least than certain people. And so certain people almost aren't worthy of our kindness or our politeness. They're the people that we get to just be rude to and sling orders at or accusations at and so on. There's those sayings, right, that some people get up on the wrong side of the bed and it's like their whole day they're just unkind and short with people. Consider the way that the proverb writer describes appropriateness here too. Now go back to Proverbs 25. I suppose we could include Proverbs 25:1, Proverbs 25:11, or not Proverbs 25:1, I meant Proverbs 15:1. It's a pretty well-known proverb too. The soft answer that turns away wrath, but a harsh one stirs up strife. But Proverbs 25:11, if I can get my own references right, Proverbs 25:11 is another one of those that's fairly well known. It's a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. And that's where I got the tagline from, in case you didn't notice that courtesy is golden. And we don't know for sure, are we meant to picture someone fashioning gold apples and putting them on a silver platter as a display? Or could it be, and then one writer said that he saw this, he read Proverbs 25:11, and then when he saw this scene, it changed how he saw it. That there's what's called citrons that grow in Palestine, oranges, which could fit into the word for apple here. And he said, if you ever see those, a field of those or an orchard of those when it snowed, that's what it looks like. It's like golden apples on a silvery or snowy field. But either way, that's the mental picture we're meant to have when our words are kind and appropriate and fitting instead of rude. This one should be a given, though, shouldn't it? That if you're rude to people, there's going to be difficult for them to like you. Are you rude? Here's the third one this evening. Are you a critic? A critic. Are you negative? Are there people in your life that can never do right? And this one's easy to find somebody else in our life, right, that do that to us. You got anybody in your life that it seems like you can never make them happy, you can never please them? But do we ever do that to other people, our spouse, our children, our employees? Maybe, and we can get into some of the weeds here, right? Not in the sense of going deep, but in getting messy in that, what about church leadership, right? Some people are just always looking for something to point out. So look at Proverbs 11, verse 12. Proverbs 11, verse 12. Now, this one may be the extreme of where this can lead, but it's in the same arena. Proverbs 11, verse 12 says, whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense. And why I say that can be the extreme, because the idea of belittling there, it comes from a place of contempt. You may even have an English text that says whoever despises his neighbor. But keep in mind that negativity and hypercriticism, it's not just criticism. You could add the word hyper there, or overly. They tend to breed things like contempt and bitterness on both sides. And if I'm always critiquing someone, always putting them down, then I'm more likely to hold them in contempt, but they're also more likely then to respond in bitterness. It's been argued that that is the problem that ends marriages. Contempt. And how much of contempt starts with hypercriticism? Now, go from that to Proverbs 16, which is more positive. Proverbs 16, verse 21, and we'll look through verse 24. Proverbs 16, verse 21 through 24 says, the wise of heart is called discerning, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Mark it that the proverb writer is not telling us to have that empty flattery or just to say things in a nice way to manipulate people. It's about realizing that the way I say things, the tone I use, the way I balance, it's not that there's never a place to have some critique, especially as with some positive goal behind it. I want you to be better, so I'm going to point this out or help you with this. It's more about the way we do it, how much we do it. Verse 22 says this, good sense is a fountain of life to him who has it, but the instruction of fools is folly. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips. Now look at this last one. Gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. This one, you almost want to put them all together and say, people may not like me if I have this sour, rude, overly critical, and negative approach to them and to life in general. And as I reflected on this one, I thought about, and I don't know where this originated. I've seen it, I've heard it, I've used it. But it was the wisdom that says to say your criticisms and write your encouragements. And the point was, if you do need to criticize someone or let's say rebuke sin in someone's life, and the proverb writer does talk about that too, say it. That way it's said and it's done. But if you want to encourage somebody and it be lasting, it be something they pull out and look at on a bad day, write it on a card, send it in a text. Speak your criticisms, write your encouragements. Are you a critic? If you are, don't be surprised if people may not be too fond of you. And here's what happens is people stop listening. Even if you're right. Isn't that the thing about criticism? It's kind of like gossip and things where we say, well, it's true. Even if you're right, if all you ever do is criticize someone, they're going to stop listening regardless of whether it's true or not. Here's the fourth one. Not only are you a critic, but are you a perfectionist? A perfectionist. And there's two types of perfectionists. This one is not necessarily about the person who is a perfectionist with themselves. That's probably a sermon or at least a psychological thing for another time. This is more about the person that is a perfectionist toward other people. And it goes hand in hand, doesn't it, then with the critic, that I'm not satisfied. I've got to control the situation. It's one of those where if it's going to be done right, what? I'm going to have to do it. And maybe I have somebody else do it, or I give somebody else the opportunity to do it. They don't do it right the first time. Well, you're never doing that again. And you wonder how many people in the church are not song leaders today, aren't preachers at all, don't ever give a sermon. Maybe aren't even willing to lead a prayer because they did it one time and they messed up. And somebody was inflexible about it. You could bring in the hypercriticism again there too, right? Take a look at Proverbs 14, verse 4. This one's another one that's a bit of a head scratcher. Proverbs 14, verse 4. Who would have thought that oxen and perfectionism could go together? Or not to go together, I guess. Proverbs 14, verse 4 says, where there are no oxen, the manger is clean. But abundant crops come by the strength of the ox. Or simply, you won't have a good crop, a big crop, if you don't have an ox. Is it worth it? If you value a clean stable that much, that you either don't have an ox or you might even slaughter your ox because you don't like how dirty and messy he is. Now, if you really kept that going, you could say, well, slaughtering an ox is pretty messy. That's beside the point, right? That sometimes we are so controlling about a situation. We don't like inconveniences. We don't like having to work with other people because they mess up. Of course, we never mess up, right? I never make mistakes. Aren't you glad that God doesn't treat us that way? That God doesn't fire people on the spot and just disregard and get rid of them because they mess up or even they sin against Him? Now, He does have punishment reserved for those who are unrepentant and those who are rebellious and unwilling to even try to repair their mistakes or to make corrections. But aren't you glad that the perfect God doesn't require perfection of the people, even the people that He uses to carry out His work? Think about history. Think about the gospel, the scheme of redemption. And then you think about our businesses, our families, our churches. There's a saying that a sterile church is a dying church. In other words, if you don't have any messes, if there aren't problems that you're dealing with, then you may have bigger problems. We need each other, messes and all. That's why we're told to welcome one another, even with our disagreements and what we might perceive in others as failure. That's why we're told that every part of the body must work together for God to be pleased and for growth to happen as it should. And then you can think of that Romans 15, you can think of Ephesians 4, 14 through 16, every joint fit and working together. And not everybody's going to meet our standard of competency. And there's another side of that discussion, right, about encouraging and working with people to help them to be better, sure. But this is just about recognizing that I can be so inflexible and controlling that I'm a perfectionist to a fault toward other people. Are you a perfectionist? There's number next this evening. Are you angry? The question as it is formatted works because this is not saying, do you ever get angry? There's times we need to get angry, aren't there? This is more, are you somebody who has uncontrollable anger? Somebody whose life is dominated by anger? There's two proverbs here. Look at the two sides of this, or the two warnings. Proverbs 19, verse 19. It's about the way we come to the aid of a person. Proverbs 19, verse 19. What's fascinating about these two is they're both written more from the other perspective of the Proverbs warning you, be careful about these people. But we might flip the script and say, what if I am that person? Proverbs 19:19 says, a man of great wrath will pay the penalty. For if you deliver him, if you come to his aid, if you bail him out, you will only have to do it again. And then Proverbs 22:24 tells you not to be friends with somebody who has that kind of uncontrollable anger. And anger's a lot like a drug. People get down, they get to where they're struggling, and they use some form of a drug. It might be alcohol, it might be something else. And as they begin the process, in the middle of the process, they usually feel really great. And that's why we call it a high, isn't it? But then afterwards, they feel even worse. Sometimes that's how anger works, isn't it? Anger can be addictive because it feels good in the moment to let somebody have it, to yell at someone, to let them, sometimes more things, but it feels good to put somebody in their place and express ourselves. And then we usually feel bad about it afterwards, but then we do it again because it felt so good. Of course, unchecked anger can even be harmful to our health. Check out the studies that have been done in the medical world of what it does to things like blood pressure, your blood sugar even. The statistics for things like diabetes and heart disease for people that struggle with uncontrolled anger, it's a whole lot higher than otherwise. That's why we say, you either learn to control it, or it will control you. People tend to resent those that get angry like that. Either they get angry at the slightest thing, or they get angry and they just can't let it go. We struggle with both as humanity. We get angry at the drop of a hat, or we get angry and it turns into indignation and it turns into bitterness, and then we nurse it like a baby. We just keep holding on to that negative emotion. Are you angry? Here's another one this evening. We've got to wind these up or wind them down, however you want to think about it. Are you someone who is a taker? A taker. The original list asked, are you a mooch or a moocher? Look at Proverbs 30, verses 15 and 16. Now, a heads up, this proverb may be a general warning about being greedy. But it's also possible that it's looking at someone that they may even use flattery to manipulate you. It's someone, though, that it seems like any time they reach out to you, it might be any time they call you or they text you or they show up, you learn to know they're here for something. They need something. They need a favor. They're asking for money, whatever it is. And if it becomes a habit, well, that's also something people quickly resent, and people may not like you. Proverbs 30, verse 15, the leech has two daughters, give and give. And that may be that's their names. It may be that's what they're crying out, that they cry, give, more. 3 things are never satisfied. 4 never say enough. Sheol, the barren womb, the land never satisfied with water. I don't know if he was talking about Western Oklahoma or not, maybe. And the fire that never says enough. And so you can ask that question, and if you're welcome to add the 2 to your handout. I don't know that I put them on the handout. I think I put it on the website handout. Anyway, which one are you? It's been often observed that there are 2 different types of people, that it's one of the ways you can break down humanity, that there's only 2 types of people that go through life. Now, you can change which type you are, thankfully, but you're either a giver or a taker. You're either always looking for what you can get from somebody or always looking for them to do you a favor, or you're somebody who's the opposite, who's looking to help. But as we said, there's a place for boundaries and a place even for healthy boundaries that say, no, I can't help you anymore. And even to realize sometimes we enable people. But what if we're on the other side of that sometimes? How many of you like leeches? Anybody? That's why I don't swim in ponds and things like that. I don't even wade in them. All right. When I was pretty young, I saw another young man come out of a pond we were fishing at. He'd been swimming, and yeah, you don't want to know how many leeches he had. Okay, and some of you are already getting kind of squeamish. So we're going to stop right there. Okay, I almost didn't use the picture because of that. I didn't want you to be that upset at the sermon, but this is a love-hate sermon anyway. It just comes with the territory. But if we're like that, people may not like us. And then here's I think we're at number 7, not just number next. Are you a deceiver? We could ask for a show of hands on this one, couldn't we? How many of us like a liar? Or someone that's always seems like trying to pull the wool over our eyes. And this is another one that interlaces with some of the others. Sometimes people that are takers, that this fits into their manipulative work. Am I a liar? Now, the format that's in Proverbs 16, the 3 and then 4, it's used a few more times in Proverbs 16, but a similar rhetorical format is used back in Proverbs chapter 6. It's the one where you have the 6 and the 7. And it's all putting forth a total list of 7 things that God dislikes or God hates. What's one of those that's in verse 17? A lying tongue. A lying tongue. Is there anything that erodes trust in a relationship more than deceit, than lies? And we like our little white lies. I like how someone said, and I think they're making a play on the word evangelistic and maybe evangelical, but they said some, even as Christians, they like to speak elastically, where they like to stretch the truth just a little bit. Just a little exaggeration never hurt anybody, right? And yet, you tell one lie, you got to tell another lie. That's part of why it never ends. And then you can just add that last word, it never ends well either. I'm mindful of Jacob. Now, you got to lay some blame on mama, right? On his mama. But Jacob's life is a story. It's not the only story, but it is a story of deceit. Deceives his dad. And then you look at what happens between Jacob and Laban, his father-in-law. All of the deception that on both sides of that. No wonder Jacob decides it's better to go back home and face Esau because of deceit. Let's read our last reading for the evening. Proverbs chapter 12. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 has been in our lists previously. But notice the larger context. There's a whole section here in Proverbs 12, beginning at verse 17, and read through verse 20. It says, "Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit. There is one whose rash words are like sword thrust, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Truthful lips," verse 19, "endure forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but those who plan peace have joy." Are you someone who tells lies? Well, then people may not like you. Here are 7 more reasons why someone may not like us. As disciples of Jesus, we're called to a higher standard. We're called to hold up the scriptures, to hold up the word, and as it were, to hold up a mirror and self-examine ourselves. And that's where we are tonight. Let's hold up a mirror and self-examine ourselves. Let's not beat ourselves up, but let's take a good look in the mirror. Might be a good assignment for our week, is to think over, pray over where we are in our interactions with others. The beginning and the end of it all for us as Christians, the end is that last line, to be like Jesus. Can you find a better example of someone who was kind, considerate? Sure, he had his times when there was an appropriate word of rebuke. But someone who was always gracious, always helpful, always humble. So when you look at these and you say, well, here's some reasons why people may not like me. Maybe I can work on being more like Jesus. And then I realized Jesus himself said that some people aren't going to like you, and that's putting it lightly. They're going to hate you because of righteousness. If that's the case, that's one thing. And that's where we kindly say, that's on them. But may it never be that I'm the one building a legitimate barrier between me and someone else. What happens, not just in our lives, but as Christians who are also called to share Jesus with others? What happens when I want to share the gospel with someone, but I've lost my credibility because, say, the last one, because I'm known as someone who doesn't tell the truth or can't be trusted with the truth? I've lost my integrity. I've lost my credibility. I may have lost an opportunity to be like Jesus and show someone the gospel.